Hello my friends and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. I like when someone asks you a question, supposedly to find what you think about an issue. And then you provide the answer. Obviously that's what your answer is for the particular issue. And then because the person who asked you a question doesn't like your answer, tries to ask you more questions and more clarifications in an attempt to maybe you change your answer and then tries to attack your answer, and then you say, wait a minute, you asked me for my answer on that issue. This is my answer. You don't like it? No problem. Don't ask me again. But this is my answer. Well, here is an issue with Vladimir Putin. He was asked about the war in Ukraine. And he gives an answer, and these guys are all upset with his answer. And let me see what's going on here. This article comes from Republic World, and it's from yesterday, October 15th, 2022. It says that Zelensky advisor slams Putin, quote-unquote, no regret, remark over war. And I'm quoting again, responsibility addiction. So, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's advisor, Mikhailo Podolya, I thought it was Podolyak, has slammed Russian President Vladimir Putin's quote-unquote no regrets remark over the war. So on Friday, Putin, while addressing reports after attending a summit in Astana, was asked by reporters if he had any regrets over the Russia-Ukraine war. He replied that the war was inevitable, adding that he had no regrets, whilst mentioning that he realized what was happening in Ukraine was unpleasant. The Russian president insisted that his actions were quote-unquote right and timely, as per reports from Sky News. So these guys don't like, obviously, his answers, and they obviously talk about it. What do you think? I mean, if he would have regrets, he can change it right now. He can stop that the invasion. And this reminds me of another incident. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I will mention it here. If you remember the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazi leaders, some of them were rounded up, some of them just they came on their own and said, we're going to go to trial, hoping that the trial will be a Western trial. Well, too bad. They met other kind of people during the trial who were the prosecutors and other interests behind the trial. So most of them they were sentenced to death by hanging. As you know, Hermann Göring, he dodged the whole thing because he poisoned himself before that could happen. Allegedly, he gave one of the guards his watch, expensive watch, and they gave him the poison. And that's one of the stories. Now, another person who was one of the, I don't know, 3, I think, that were not sentenced to death, and they had long prison terms, and one of them got a life in prison. That was one of Hitler's deputies, and he's got a lot of titles, and his name was Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess, he landed in England, I think in 42 or 43, and he tried to speak with a gentleman over there in Great Britain and tried to cut a deal, because the Germans were trying to stop the war and they were trying to negotiate. Sounds familiar? But the Brits said, no, we're not going to go negotiate with you. We're going to have to do this. Anyway, history has a lot of examples when, especially from the Second World War, when the Germans tried to discuss, an armistice, stop the war. And the other side said, no. Okay, and that's a fact. It's not, you can find that. And anyway, Rudolf Hess was held until the end of the war, and he was absolutely trialed at Nuremberg trials. And then at the end, when he was sentenced, he read from a little paper whatever he had to say after his sentencing moment. And he said one of the things over there that he didn't bend. He said what he has to say. He said that I'm glad I was happy to serve under this guy who was the guy with the mustache, and if I would do it again, I would have to choose again, I would do it again. So everybody was like, oh my God. And then he said, I bereue nicht. In German, that is, I regret nothing. So now we have this Hitler guy here, Putin, saying, I bereue nicht. I regret nothing. I don't regret anything. So that's not good. If we were to, and I hope we try to look at the war between United States and Russia on Ukrainian territory and with Ukrainian population and Russian population, then we, if we are to look at it objectively, we could realize certain things had to happen, and had to happen because they were channeled to happen. There were many attempts from Russia to negotiate and discuss and explain to the United States that arming Ukraine and trying to get Ukraine into NATO, that's going to be leading to this, because that's a big red line for Russia, which said we can't afford to have your equipment, missiles right at our border, as you would not like it either. But since things are not honest and objective, they say, we don't want to talk to you. On the other hand, the Russians tried to explain that the population, the Russian population in eastern Ukraine, are attacked militarily by the Kiev regime or leadership with Ukrainian military. And those guys were defending themselves. They were not in an occupation fight, they were in a defensive fight because of what happened in 2014. You know, remember the coup d'etat organized by certain people outside of Ukraine with traitors inside Ukraine. They overthrew the legitimate, democratically elected government of Yanushenko, I think it was, and they ousted him. They killed some Russians in Odessa. They burned them alive, about 40 or something, some nationalists, and then the government was recognized immediately. The guys who took the power with their help was recognized by the guys who, you know. So after that, the Russians in the east said, you know, east of Ukraine said, you know, we can't participate in this, and we're not going to. We want something separate. We don't recognize that those traitors in Kiev who took power or with armed with forces, like an insurrection, with outside interference from a country that recognized the government. So everything that came after was illegitimate because these guys did not vote for them. So it was not democratically elected by the entire Ukraine. They sent the military. Those guys were helped with ammunition and other things by Russia. There was not an offensive war from those guys, were a defensive war. These guys were killing them. These guys were defending their territory instead of just talking. There were Minsk Agreements 1, Minsk Agreements 2, in which they were supposed to solve the problem in the eastern Ukraine peacefully. They would be in Ukraine territories, kind of autonomy within Ukraine. So those would not go to anywhere. But there will be, their language will be protected, school, education, and so on. And they will vote for the whole thing. They will be Ukrainians. Well, there were some guarantors, which was Germany and France. They also signed that they agreed to make the Ukrainian government fulfill its obligations, signed in the Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 agreements, but the United States had other plans. And then they continued to bomb these guys, continued to harass them. They didn't implement the Minsk Protocol. And then the Russians said, hey, it's been from 2014-15 to 2021. Let's do something. Give us some assurances on the paper that this country will not get to be in NATO and you're not going to have weapons next to us, like you would not like us to have it in Canada or Mexico. That was in December 2022. If you remember, Lavrov gave it to Blinken. Blinken did not even answer to that. Then they did what they said they will do, and here we go again. Now, from Putin's perspective, he's defending his people over there in Ukraine and his country, because if he would allow Ukraine to be part of NATO, NATO will have rockets the next day closer to their positions in Russia. So from his perspective, helping his nation, connationals, and the security of his country. So he has no regrets whatsoever, and if he would have some, he must have lost his mind. So this is their justification. Now what is the other one's justification? The territory of Ukraine. All right, how about 2014? All right, so we can go back and back. How about NATO expansion into towards Russia and so on? They say, well, it's okay. Well, you know, sometimes you have a gentleman agreement. You know what it is? I tell you something and you tell me something and we agree, shake hand, and that's called a gentleman agreement, right? Well, the West were not gentlemen, and they really showed again that they screwed the Russians again, and the Russians got to the limit. Tell me, what were they supposed to do? Were they supposed to allow NATO have rockets next to their border? If yes, okay, well then you would allow then Russian rockets right there on the border with Rio Grande, right? You would say yes, because you know that would not happen. But if that were to happen, then you're going to have a heart attack and a little mini stroke. Just thinking about it, the possibility. It's okay. We got a lot of South American and Central American countries who might as well do that for the Russians. And then what? If we get to that point. So yeah, he bereut nicht, nothing. He doesn't regret anything. Why would he? Thank you very much for being with me again today. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.